All right, we're a couple minutes after the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, and thank you everyone for joining us today to discuss best practices for understanding media trends. As the operators of the largest news media database on the planet, we here at Onclusive are especially excited about this topic and to share analysis of several recent media trends. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. Deirdre Breakenridge is the CEO of Pure Performance Communications. She's a career-long storyteller and media expert, helping brands and professionals ignite energy and engagement, lead pressing conversations, and grow their influence in the market. Deirdre has worked with senior leaders and organizations, including the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, JBC, Kraft, NASDAQ, NBA Events and Attractions, and the Public Relations Society of America. Deirdre is the author of 6 business books, sharing stories and advice to navigate changing consumer behavior and an evolving media landscape. Her most recent book, Answers for Modern Communicators, was published by Routledge. Her 7th book, Answers for Ethical Marketers, will be released by Routledge in January 2021. For 15 years, Deirdre has taught PR and social media courses, online and in the classroom for NYU, UMass, Rutgers, and Fairleigh Dickinson University. She's taken her passion for teaching to LinkedIn Learning, and as one of their instructors, she has developed 8 video courses on PR and marketing. Deirdre has been blogging at PR Strategies for over 10 years, and she's also the host of the podcast Women Worldwide, which is celebrating its 5th anniversary this year. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Deirdre.
Thank you, Rachel. It's great to be with you, and I can't wait to dive into media trends.
We're so excited to have you. And my name is Rachel Beauvais. I am a strategic account director within Onclusive's Global Customer Success Organization. My role here is to support communications teams in harnessing the power of Onclusive's media monitoring capabilities and to help turn insights into action through our modern analytics and reporting. During today's session, we'll be discussing how trending topics should inform your overall communication strategy, how to use social media signals to detect which topics are gaining traction, how to analyze sentiment to help determine which trends to embrace, and translating topic insights into story development and pitch strategy. So please keep in mind that throughout today's webinar, you can submit questions to Deirdre and myself using the Zoom Q&A feature, and we'll be responding to questions at the end of the presentation. That being said, let's get started. So the first step to understanding and utilizing media trends, of course, is to actually spot the trend. Before we can even begin building our communications plan, we must first understand the market we're targeting. So ask yourself, what matters most to your constituents? What are their biggest challenges, and conversely, the largest opportunities? Where can your company find a strategic advantage? The modern communications professional watches everything that is happening in the media. So once we've spotted the trend, the next step is to catch and ride its wave before it dissipates. So here we need to ask ourselves, what are the trending topics? Which issues are just beginning to swell up in the media? In which media are they appearing? How are they being mentioned? And how quickly are their stories spreading via social media? Every PR campaign has a rhythm to it, its own certain movement, and by monitoring certain signals and maintaining a consistent state of readiness, you can catch the wave at just the right moment. We know, and the data proves, that the most successful media coverage is that which is liked, shared, commented on, and reposted. Social media engagement is acting as both a proxy to coverage consumption, but is also the path to additional free reach. By understanding which stories are gaining traction on social platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and even Pinterest, you can find early indications of which topics may trend for your own brand and where it makes sense to lend your voice. If you monitor closely and frequently, you may even spot these opportunities before your competition is aware and get far enough ahead of the wave to actually own the story and become a thought leader. Now, some trends are so enormous that they don't just shape the media, but change the world. This is especially timely as we've all seen how the current pandemic has impacted the way we think, including how we live and how we work. We're going to now review some data from our Onclusive media monitoring system and our analysis of these related trends, and also demonstrate how a few particular companies have managed their brand communications through this unique period of time. Our first case study is within the education publishing industry, a business category that has been particularly impacted during this pandemic. So Deirdre, I know that you've actually published some of your books with Pearson Education, so you're probably particularly familiar with this space. Would you mind sharing some background with us, especially around how Pearson Education responded to the distance learning trend that this pandemic has created?
Sure, and you're absolutely right. I did publish books with Pearson, and I've just been watching the industry from a publishing perspective as a professor over the years, and as an author, of course. And even if I go back to 1999, because that's when my first book was being written and came out in 2000, I don't even think the distance learning, that was not a trend yet. We weren't talking about digital books and that kind of opportunities for students to learn. However, Pearson has been riding, driving, navigating this distance learning trend throughout the years, even right up until now during a global pandemic, when they roll out as a part of the helpful and meaningful conversation. And, just for example, they released that they were going to have cost-free, effective resources for students who were transitioning from in the classroom to online, and they were going to work with universities and their partners. So a lot of these trends and driving them and taking advantage of them, if you're a PR professional sitting back, think of it as, you're using media as a way to get out with your stories. And yes, you're always going to look at how well you did with your campaign in terms of media, but this is also informing communications. And when you can inform communications and business decisions, that's when you move from profit center or from cost center to profit center, which is really important. And that's where you want to be in PR. So in the case of Pearson, if we were to take a look at their share of reach, for example, and this is really looking at, topics that dominate the media, related topics around distance learning, which they've been driving, you can see that digital books as a topic reached more readers than, let's say, articles written about distance learning itself and hardcover books. And then if you go, because that's at 51%, the digital book. So that's important to keep in mind. And then if you look at the share of voice, so now you're seeing the actual number of written articles on a particular related topic. Well, this is where distance learning is actually capturing 47% of the media, and you're seeing less share of voice, 35% with digital books, and then you see even less when it comes to hard copy books. Now, I like to always look at the comparison coverage because this tells a story, and it really does tell a story about what the media is reporting on. So you can see that digital books really were dominating the reporting early in the year. So you're looking at a snapshot between January and July. So they're dominating the coverage, dips down a little bit, and then look at the spike in distance learning at a time when the world is really grappling with coronavirus, a global pandemic. The spike in the distance learning goes up. And what's even a little bit more interesting is to see how over time digital books remain, but then you see also this upward trend of hard copy books. What is that? I mean, this is where you need to dive in a little bit more deeply to see where you can actually ride a wave and become a part of the conversation. And if I were to give a possibility, perhaps with hardcover books, is during a time of stay at home and there's perhaps a shift in consumer behavior at this point in their reading preferences. It does show that consumers are reading more hardcover fiction books, like books by John Patterson and John Grisham and James Patterson and even Stephen King. So these are the types of trends that you can look at to see what's going on when you dig more deeply. Now, share of reach over time also tells a story. You can see how digital books dominated in June. Distance learning was a topic that really remained strong over time. And because distance learning remains strong as a topic, I look at that to say, look at how many more people are working from home, whether it's more time that they have because they're home, or people perhaps are furloughed, or perhaps they're leaving their jobs and it's a transition for them. They want to learn more. I even see, as a LinkedIn learning instructor, an uptick in the courses that I create for LinkedIn Learning, that more professionals and students are taking my courses and talking and sharing about them on social media. So all a part of this distance learning and this upward trend. Now, if you were to look at share of amplification over time, now we're talking about what's going on in social media. And we see distance learning, it captures a bulk of the share of the amplification since March, which, you know, even though there are spikes in topic volumes for digital books or hardcover books, you see where this conversation is. And when you look at this, whether you're in education or online learning or wherever you are, you can use this as an opportunity to say, how come the media coverage is not getting into social media? Is this maybe something because we are reaching different audiences who aren't taking a look at certain journals and publications and online outlets? What do we need to develop? What content to deliver through social media that will create more of the conversation? So that's also a way to look at it. Now, when you look at the sentiment, this is always something that fascinates me. So the sentiment for the distance learning clearly is positive. So as more people are taking the opportunity, they're learning online, you know, students are going online for classes, it's positive. It's going way, way up. And then all of a sudden you see sort of the positive sloping down, and at the same time you get this uptick in the negative. So what does that mean? And this is where you take a pause. So if you're an educator, you might say, hey, is this soundbite wearing down a little bit? Or what is the cause of this negative? What do we need to know? If you're in this space where we need to lend our voice to fix something, to change some miscommunication maybe, or secondly, is this just a natural post-enthusiasm, right, that happens where the honeymoon phase is over a little bit with the distance learning, and suddenly people who are using it, and the media is reporting on it, maybe there's hidden costs in platforms, maybe there's technology misuse, maybe attitudes are surfacing that we're not surfacing in the beginning when there was more talk about the distance learning. Now, looking at trending topics, okay, this is the sweet spot for all of you, no matter what industry you're in. When you can look at trending topics around what it is that you want to talk about in your industry, this is where you can lend your voice, places that maybe you didn't know to look, pitches that can be formulated, even business insights that might change the way you're producing or enhancing your products and services. So pay attention to these types of insights, and let's take a little bit of a closer look. So if we look at free ebooks. That is the second most trended topic when we're in this digital book arena, right? So what does this mean? Well, if you're Pearson or you're an educational institution and you're offering free books, it is a time to insert your voice, to talk about what you're doing, how you're being helpful, and you're really a meaningful part of the discussion. And it's no wonder that this is the second most trending topic, because during COVID-19, if you look globally at university presses like MIT, Cambridge, Duke, they're offering free ebooks, right? So they're using free ebooks and course materials during coronavirus to help people and to navigate and to make it easier for the online learning. Now, another really interesting trending topic is YouTube. Now, why is the YouTube channel popping up? Well, let's think about it. Video, right? Video is a format. People love to learn through video. I know that through LinkedIn, being a LinkedIn learning instructor, but this is a conversation around academic curriculum. So we know that it's not just being digitized, that video is surfacing, and is this something to inform your communications? You could also look at it, if you're a corporation, you know that video learning is no longer seen as a novel idea. And actually, this is a common practice among the world of corporations. And what can you lend to the conversation in terms of the learning that you're doing and giving to your employees during a pandemic? Now, taking a look at more specifically, so now we're going to dive into, this is Pearson's media coverage over time, January through June. So I'm thinking that if you look at the way the trends are going, the upward spike in March, dips a little bit, then goes up again in June, are they capitalizing on the trends? Well, according to this and their media coverage, it could be with their announcements over the cost-free resources. It could be in June, you can see the upward rise in the media, because they did actually announce, they launched a Connection Academy, which is quality online learning, and it focuses on complete K through 12 online schools. So you can see how clearly they are a part of the distance learning conversation. And then for social amplification, how does this translate over? We don't necessarily see the same trend in how the earned media was amplified across social media. They actually experienced year-to-date low in the month of March, and then experienced a steady climb since then. So you'd have to dig deeper to analyze this particular paradox. Were people not really embracing within social media the news that they shared that was picked up on the media? And how could they have maybe enhanced that in different communities where peers might be trusting peers more? And we know that social media, some of the feeds themselves become the news. And how do we capitalize on that and get people more engaged in social media? And then lastly, sentiment. This is the final data point, and this is the real story for Pearson to see how they managed through the pandemic. And I would say that they did pretty well. If you look at this scorecard, if you look at this report card, pardon the pun, at 76% positive, that's really good. Now, being in PR, no matter what that negative score is, so yes, it is less than 10%. If I was on the PR team, I would still be looking and learning to see what that negative is, where it needs to be corrected, fixed, and how you can move forward stronger in your communication. And at this point, Rachel, I'm gonna send it over to you.
Awesome. That was fantastic, Deirdre. Thank you so much for sharing that analysis and, especially your perspective. All right, so let's review another case study. One of the most covered companies during the pandemic has been Zoom, who also happens to be the webcasting technology behind our webinar today. So let's take a look at some of the trends that have shaped Zoom's coverage this year. All right, so first we took a look at some related topics and keywords which have trended recently, including shelter in place, work from home, video conferencing, and reopen the economy. Not surprisingly, there was virtually no coverage of any of these terms at the start of the year and into February. And it really wasn't until March that we saw shelter in place picking up and work from home spiking the most dramatically. But it is interesting, especially that video conferencing still received the lower amount of coverage and didn't really pick up until April, around the same time we saw reopen the economy enter the conversation. So now we're switching from the previous slide's coverage view, and now we're examining social media amplification. And we can see that while work from home received more media coverage every single month this year, it's actually really interesting to see that starting in April, shelter in place actually captured the majority of social media engagement. Another interesting lens to look through is the emergence of new jargon around Zoom this year. So two frequently used terms that you probably heard have been Zooming and Zoom bombing. The data here helps clarify that story. So we can see that by February, Zooming had established itself as an everyday term in the media, but midway through March, when the shelter in place mandates were taking effect, we can see Zoom bombing rising in the media. And then it spiked in April with a 75% share of the media. It's interesting to see that some of the terms seem to be fleeting, as Zoom bombing has fallen all the way back down to a 25% share of the media, likely suggesting that this is a less popular concept among journalists today. And it's also worth noting that once Zoom bombing was on the rise, both in instances and in media coverage, Zoom took action and enabled passcode settings for its users, which helped decrease the amount of Zoom bombing. And as such, looks like the coverage also went down. And we can also see the same effect when looking at these two terms, share of amplification over the same time period. So here we can see that Zoom bombing was especially amplified in March and April and has now significantly decreased throughout July. All right, and now let's switch our view to coverage sentiment. So here, when we analyze article sentiment around the term Zooming, it's fortunate for Zoom that other than just a really modest spike in negative sentiment articles in April, this particular term has maintained largely positive coverage. All right, Deirdre, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Great. Okay, so thank you, Rachel. You know, the last two case studies that we looked at, so Pearson and Zoom, they were really poised and well positioned to share helpful resources and do what they needed to do during a pandemic in terms of communication. Some industries stand out, but because they're disadvantaged, like the travel industry. So let's take a look at how overall the airline industry did versus some of its carriers. Okay, so this is comparison coverage, and this is just a simple analysis looking at overall airline industry COVID response, and it's from January to July, and you can see that the overall industry coverage was really quite steady, and that's in the lighter green, but then yet you have three of the airlines. You have Southwest in the dark blue, JetBlue is the light blue, and United, which is the yellow. And there is a point actually where Southwest Airlines creeps up a little bit and is dominating the coverage, even more so than the general airline coverage. And that happens in this month, in July. So is Southwest doing something right? Well, we're going to dig in a little bit deeper to see what's going on. When you look at the share of the amplification, over time. Here you see, once again, greatest share of social media amplification. Both Southwest and United Airlines have a lot of social engagement. Now, you're going to find out very soon that this is good for Southwest, but not so good for United. All right, it's interesting to look at the sentiment. And first off, I just want to point out that I've been looking at sentiment for a really long time now. And I find it's almost different that I see the neutral bar completely flat. Usually that neutral bucket is larger or slightly larger, but you just see a clear either positive or negative tone in what's going on in terms of the industry. So this is the airline industry. The coverage is positive, negative, very polarized. But what you do see is that even though there's a spike in the negative, airlines might have stumbled in the beginning. The negative seems to come down and it joins with the positive that says that they're sorting out their communication and potentially starting to get things right. All right, so here's the final scorecard. And, having these charts alongside each other, you get a lot of insights here. So if you look at the top left, and we can establish this as kind of the baseline for positive, the overall airline COVID response got a positive 43%. But then if you look to the right, which is the top right, is United Airlines, they're actually below the media coverage positive average. And then if you look down to the lower left of the chart, you see Southwest Airlines, and they're performing better. So they're at 49% positive. And then even a little bit, which is interesting, maybe JetBlue didn't stand out as much in its coverage, but look at the amount of positive. They're actually the clear winners here at 54%. And knowing where you went wrong and what you did well, once again, this is going to inform your communications moving forward. Think profit center, not cost center. So let's just stick on JetBlue for a little bit, because you can see, so this is going back to the overall coverage, and on the left, JetBlue, little bit of coverage, slightly more in April, small May, in June. And then you look at the 54% positive. So there's a couple of things that you could say here. First, it's quality over quantity. I'm always going to be someone who says, just because you get coverage doesn't mean that that's going to help your brand. So you want to be targeted. You want it to be valuable information that's embraced and that is positive. And secondly, during a time of a global pandemic, right, during a crisis, lend your voice, be timely, share what people need to know. You want to be a part of the valuable communication and conversation and not the confusion. And there's something here that says JetBlue spoke less when necessary, and as such, it was more positive, and they were the clear winners during this COVID pandemic. And Rachel, I think with that, I'm handing it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Deirdre. That was really interesting, and appreciate that additional analysis as well. So that's bringing us to the end of our case studies for today's session. But before we move into Q&A, I wanted to wrap things up with just a few final thoughts. So I feel like what these case studies and analysis really take away and bring to the forefront is that when trying to spot an early trend and attempting to make sense of it, we can't just look at the volume of media coverage around that topic. And that's because pure quantity of coverage, to your point, Deirdre, can be a bit deceiving. really to truly understand the characteristics of a trending topic, we also need to study other metrics such as its share of social media engagement, its share of reach, how the sentiment around that topic may have changed over time. Each one of these metrics gives us a different signal of quality, and any single metric on its own tends to read as a little bit short-sighted. But together, though, each metric is almost like its own chapter of a book. It's really adding to the story as a whole.
I really like that. I totally agree, Rachel. The signal of quality, the chapters that add to the whole, all of this adds up in ways that can really help companies to get to that, find that sweet spot, get to a point where they can ride the trend upward, be the thought leaders, and deliver the communication that fuels positive conversation that helps. So I will always say, and the biggest takeaway here is definitely related to your point, quality beats quantity. We saw it with the JetBlue media coverage, the simple analysis and their brand sentiment. They managed to stay out of a media frenzy. And, it's not easy, but you have to selectively insert your brand in the right way, getting into the media stories that make sense, that add value, that don't confuse, and being able to look at these trends and to dive deeper into the media and how it translates over to social media really, really helps. So I think the JetBlue team handled the crisis, I would say, with patience and with savvy. And always, quality is going to trump quantity. So, just because you can share doesn't mean that you always should. Be there for your constituents when they need you, and be a part of the conversation with valuable information.
Totally agree. Thanks, Deirdre. All right, so that brings us to Q&A. We're ready to take some questions. And for anyone still with us, if you haven't already, if you have any questions, you can submit those to us using the Zoom Q&A feature. We've already got some questions loaded up. So Deirdre, I'm going to start lobbing them to you.
Okay.
All right, so our first question is, when analyzing media trends, how do you think about the geography? So are you looking at trends globally, regionally, both? What's your take on that?
So my take is, where are you operating? Because wherever your business is, you're going to want to make sure that you're watching how you're covered. So if you're doing business in the US and China and Europe, then yes, those trends are going to be very important. Remember, we're also transcending global borders and boundaries. So that is something to keep in mind. I would be watching for geolocation specific trends.
That makes sense. All right, this one is interesting. So how do you convince leadership to take advantage of a trending topic when that topic might draw unwanted attention to other items within that topic? Obviously this is especially true with today's, countercultural and social media landscape. What are your thoughts there?
Oh boy, this is a good one.
Yeah.
So you have a trending topic. Let's put it this way: are people expecting you? Do your customers need to hear from you around this topic? You have to think of it that way. Silence and being out of the conversation sometimes says something to them as well. I mean, I've learned over the years, and I'll just use a crisis example. You're always stepping back to say, who needs to hear from us, right? In the right time, because it's going to help. And when that expectation is there, that's when you sort of have to roll up your sleeves and just be ready. Be ready for all the ways, the questions, and how the chapters are going to come together for you at that point. So you can go in it prepared, but do people expect you to say something? Yes, then you're going to.
Absolutely. All right, we have a few tool-related questions come in, one of which is, what is the most effective tool for finding trending topics for our market? Another related question, sort of stemming off of that, how do you gather your data for trending topics? Which tools are we using? Um, I would obviously be remiss as the Onclusive representative on this call if I didn't mention a couple of our tools. We have actually two platforms that just launched recently. One is called Essentials and one is called Pro, that automatically analyze your coverage lists and automatically pull out trending keywords and topics. They show you the total amount of mentions, things of that. So it's really interesting to see those trends over time. So this is another interesting question that we got, Deirdre. Relative to the free ebook example, when you say to insert yourself into the conversation, does that mean that you need to offer something to your audience, or are you just adding commentary on the topic? Might you be able to give an example?
So you could be offering something that you're rolling out with that perhaps was going to be a paid resource that you're making free for everybody because it is during a global pandemic and you want to do your part. But it also could be you're in a space, you're in an industry, and you've done a lot of significant research and you're rolling out with fresh statistics to the media saying, if we were going to do a comparison of ebooks and learning, audiobooks and learning, video as a format and learning in our industry, this is what our customers said. So you kind of have to be creative here. It's an it depends type of answer, but those could be two different case scenarios that you could possibly run with if you have the resources.
That makes sense. All right. Another question that we've received, you mentioned Pinterest as a social channel to monitor trends. I'm more familiar with Twitter and Facebook, but how do you measure engagement on Pinterest? I think we can kind of tag team this one, Deidre. So within our platform, we generally look at and focus in on Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest as a really good barometer for social media consumption and engagement of coverage. So, like this question stated, a lot of people are familiar with using Twitter and Facebook for that, but less familiar with Pinterest. But, Pinterest has been gaining popularity over the last, especially handful of years. So it is, again, acting as a really nice barometer and also sort of a different almost flavor of what's going on and within these coverage trends. So whereas, with Twitter, we can tweet and retweet pieces of coverage. With Facebook, we engage them by liking and commenting and sharing these stories. Pinterest allows our audience to save those stories for later, share them with anyone following them on that platform as well. So again, it's just a slightly different means of consumption, but still, when we look at social media consumption overall, just a really good and increasingly engaged barometer of what's going on as far as social media engagement of that coverage goes. What's your take on that, Deirdre?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Rachel. I would also take a look and keep in mind that if you are interested in a female audience, I'm pretty sure Pinterest still skews toward women. So it's important to note what they're liking, resharing, pinning, and what their engagement habits are, because what they're doing could quite inform your brand of maybe things that you need to share. Social media, again, media drives social media. So I guess that's what I would say about Pinterest, but definitely keeping an eye on that female audience.
Great. Okay, so another really interesting question for you, Deirdre. How do you analyze media trends demographically? So, maybe slicing those trends generationally, millennials versus baby boomers.
Yeah, this is a great one. So I've just recently done 52-week plus study with millennials, learning about their communication habits. So I do think that we want to be more targeted. You want to understand the media that is reaching certain demographics, especially if you're catering, if your product or your service is made for that demographic. So you could be doing it through whatever media you're analyzing before you roll out with your pitch. Clearly, you're going to see the demographics of different publications and media outlets, whatever databases or tools that you're using. And it's informative, because today I do want to stress that you want to be targeted in your outreach. If you're reaching out to with a story that really is going to interest, let's say, millennials, then you want to make sure the outlet you're reaching, the person who's covering this type of information that you would share, would have an interest, because a large part of their audience is millennial. So here's where you really want to hone in and understand.
It makes sense. Thank you, Deirdre.
You're welcome. It just speaks to the due diligence of your pitching and your homework. And if you want to build a relationship with that media professional and that outlet.
Absolutely. All right. We have a few more technical questions coming in as well. Sort of going back to those metrics and the charts and graphs that we were showing earlier in the presentation. One of them, can you please explain what amplification metric means? So this one is interesting. When we use the term amplification, when you saw that metric come up on those charts and graphs in our session today, what we're talking about is really social media consumption and engagement of coverage. So from a Facebook platform perspective, we are looking at any likes, any comments, any shares of that particular piece of coverage. For Twitter, that's going to speak to tweets and retweets of those articles, of those blogs. And for Pinterest, it's going to be pins of that coverage. And again, sort of looking at that overall really gives us a really nice read and barometer on how actively this piece of coverage is being consumed. Also related to that, we have a question talking about defining share of reach, share of amplification, and share of voice, and how those are measured. So share of reach specifically, and I should say reach specifically, is really speaking to the potential readership of that piece of coverage. And share of reach is looking at that sort of from almost a slice of pie perspective. So we're looking at that in comparison to maybe our brand's competitors, or if we're looking at specific keywords and trending topics, we're looking at it from that holistic view of where is the readership coming from. Share of amplification, same sort of lens, but again, looking at that lens through share of social media engagement. Again, the Facebook shares, likes, and comments, engagement on Twitter, the engagement on Pinterest, and again, how that coverage is comparing to, again, maybe our competitors' coverage, or other key trending topics within the same sort of overall topic. And share of voice, that is that metric where we are just looking at just sheer quantity of coverage. We're looking at, how much coverage are we getting, is our brand getting in comparison to our competitors, or again, if we're looking at it topically, how much of this conversation is, dominating this one topic versus, these other topics A, B, and C. Let's see. So still going through these Q&As. Let's see. Oh, this one's for you, Deirdre. Do you offer a free ebook?
Oh, what a great question. So in the past, yes, but right now I'm offering a free roadmap that's for media training. And it's to get executives in the right mindset and framework for media training. So you go through this roadmap of exercises through a model that I've developed, and it helps you to show up with more than just your talking points and your executive presence, but to be really on your toes and ready to answer any type of question that sort of comes your way, which today with the media, it could even be a softball interview and you'll be asked some questions about what's going on that's trending in the media. So that's what I'm offering for free right now. But I have in the past offered ebooks and they've done really well. So I think now at a time of learning, ebooks are really, really helpful for your audience. To learn, and it's a way that you can help them when we're navigating a new normal.
Perfect. All right, it looks like we have one more question in the queue, and this might be a great one for you as well, Deirdre. So given all of the recent blowback on Facebook, are you leveraging the platform in any certain ways right now, especially, beyond uses for trend analysis? How are you using Facebook right now?
So actually, Facebook right now, we have not been advertising. So I'm going to be rolling out with a course soon. And my team has, we've said, nope, July's the month we're not advertising on Facebook. But, we do post on Facebook, join a conversation. Facebook, let's face it, I think that from a media standpoint, let's remember we're in an echo chamber. So whatever is being fed to us through the people that we're communicating with, we're getting more of what we like. Just to keep it honest here, I want to share a resource that I actually use because I'm all about media. I love to consume media. Sometimes I have to take a break. It gets overwhelming. But I use an app called Smart News. And it's a way for me to get all sides of the media. Because as a PR professional, it's easy to, use your own your own perceptions, your own bias. You have to hear what everybody is saying in order to be informed. And I find that Smart News shares a lot of the things that I like, but also will share opposing opinions and values. So watch out for Facebook in that respect.
Perfect. All right, so we are reaching the end of today's session. So let's go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks again to everyone for joining today's session. We really appreciate all of your participation, all those great questions that you sent in. And of course, very special thanks to you, Deirdre, for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. All right, so we will be making a recording of today's session available on our website, onclusive.com. And if you would like to try out our media monitoring solution for free, try out those trending topics especially, go ahead and sign up for a free trial at onclusive.com/trial. Thanks again, everyone. And thank you again, Deirdre.
Thank you.